If you've watched football in recent years or consumed sports media, you are probably aware that one of the ways in which the game has changed recently is coaches are aggressively going for it on fourth down.
What did you think of Mike Zimmer going for it on that fourth down rather than kicking the field goal?
Analytics loses another game.
One word he said negated anything else you were thinking. Analytics.
Talk about analytics, saying that you got this percentage chance to make it on this down and distance on fourth down, so it's worth going for it. But what the analytics really don't tell you is what happens when you don't make it.
So, as you saw, this has a way of making people really angry. And some of those people might be in your family. And come Thursday, when you're all gathered together, watching the incredible slate of Thanksgiving games, it could happen. A coach could go for it, and it might not work out. And if that happens, I want you to be ready to have the difficult conversation that needs to be had. Most importantly, I want you to be prepared to win an argument with your relatives about fourth down. Let's start with the basics. If it feels like teams are going for it a lot, it's because they are, or at least more than they did in the past. Over the last 5 years, the percentage of times that teams are going for it on fourth down has risen 6 points to 13.5%. If you take out fourth quarters, where a lot of times it's out of necessity, the percentage has doubled. At ESPN, we have a model, and I'll explain more how that model and other models work in a minute, that basically says if it's a good decision or not. And going by ESPN's model, as you see here, more than ever, dramatically, coaches are acting in accordance with what the numbers recommend. Now, if you only consume football via debate shows, you might be convinced that fourth down attempts never work. I say that as someone who is on these shows. They're really only debate topics when they don't work. It's kind of like that concept of loss aversion, where you feel the loss of money more than the gains, behavioral economics concept. I think that's a big part of the reason why people don't like aggression so much. And there have been some pretty high profile failures. Earlier this year, Brandon Staley, the head coach of the Chargers, who's become something of a poster child for fourth down, very aggressively went for it against the Minnesota Vikings in the Chargers' own territory and failed. And you can disagree with that decision. I frankly wouldn't blame you, but it's also worth noting that the Chargers have converted at the fourth highest rate in the NFL this year. You just wouldn't know it. So why are teams going for it more than ever? Well, because it works. Here are the teams who have gone for it the most this year. Unsurprisingly, there's a bunch of bad teams because they have to do it. But you also notice at the top, there's some really good teams. And as much as we talk about Brandon Staley's aggression, it is kneecap-biting, coffee-guzzling Man Campbell who has become the face of fourth down aggression this season. Notably, he went for it 5 times in a recent game against Staley's Chargers, converting on 4 of the attempts, including a play to ice the game. Now, that's a higher success rate than average, but across the league, the rate at which teams have scored points after going for it on fourth down has reached 20-year highs. That's the obvious reason behind all of this. But it also changes the way they approach play calling. The Eagles, who go for it the most, are really exhibit A, knowing that on fourth and short, they're going to call the brotherly shove, the tush push, and probably convert, completely changes the way they approach third down. Changes the way defenses play them. It changes the math and makes things easier for these teams in a way that gives them a competitive advantage. So that's all important information to have on hand when your Uncle Jeff starts yelling at halftime about, coaches being controlled by the nerds. We'll get to that. But I want you to understand not just why these teams are deciding to go for it, but what actually goes into the decision. Because there's a lot of misinformation about all of the data that is being considered when they make these calls. What goes into the models, which are usually just called the analytics, right, on a broadcast. Let's revisit what Nick Saban said.
What the analytics really don't tell you is what happens when you don't make it.
Nick Saban is one of the most brilliant football minds to ever walk this earth. But on this subject, he's wrong, because that is precisely what these models take into account. Let me do my best to explain to you how they work. So you've probably heard the term win probability. Or more likely than that, you've seen those charts. Usually you see them only if it goes off the rails, like if a team seems poised to win and it's like a 99.9 percentile and then it falls off a cliff because something crazy happens. That's pretty instructive, because if a team is, let's say, up 2 scores with, 30 seconds left, probably 99% chance to win. And that is based, of course, on every game ever played, teams in the same situation. So what the model will do for 4th downs is say, if we are to convert here, here's our win probability. If we don't convert, here's the win probability. Let's also factor in the likelihood of converting. Then you compare that to the win probability if you punt or kick. That's it. And they also consider a lot of variables that people think they don't. This varies team to team, but team-specific models will consider who is on the field, players are injured going into the game, the opposing quarterback, the weather. A lot of things that are often described as not being accounted for are actually accounted for. So in sum, you're looking at every variable that you can, and then doing a simple risk-reward analysis. And then the coach makes the decision. And that is important to remember here, because the 4th down haters would have you believe that the coaches don't have any agency, that they're just obeying their robot overlords, when that is far from the case. Yes, they are considering the information given to them by those overlords more than ever, but they're also considering other pieces of information, like, do we have a cool play to run? Or did the center hurt his finger on the last play? The human element still exists. The humans are just better informed now. So come Thanksgiving, when you're in your living room, tryptophan just oozing out of your pores, and coach goes for it, and it makes your grandpa mad, just remember this. The numbers are on your side. And so is this guy. I mean, do you really want to argue with him?